Order. I call John MacDonald to move the motion.
Thanks, Sir Christopher. This is a debate about the human rights abuses in Baluchistan, but we've had a discussion already about the pronunciation. I'm sure those residents who are attending today, constituents who are attending today, will advise us accordingly. And I apologise if we've got the pronunciation collectively wrong today. Okay. Just for background, very briefly, Sir Christopher, for those who may be listening or want to read the debate later and are not familiar with the area, Baluchistan is situated at the eastern extremity of the Iranian plateau and is presently divided nearly equally between Pakistan's province and Iran's Sistan Baluchistan province. Additionally, certain parts of Afghanistan's Nimroz, Helmand and Kandahar provinces historically belong to the Baluchistan region. The strategic significance of Baluchistan, both politically and strategically, is often placed at the forefront of major events, major global events, and its location offers the potential to provide access to the energy-rich regions of Central Asia, making it vital to the whole South Asian area. Just briefly, its history, and the name Baluchistan is drawn from the Baloch people who've been its inhabitants for centuries, predominantly speaking Balochi and Bravi languages. In antiquity, the region found itself as part of the Persian Empire, and the foundations of the modern Baloch state can be traced back to the 17th century when Mir Ahmed Khan established the Khanate. The Khalat state, characterized as a princely state, persisted until the British invaded in 1839. Khalat became an associated state of the British, and by 1877, the establishment of the Baluchistan Agency signalled direct British rule over the northern half of Baluchistan, including Quetta, the capital. With the British departure from the subcontinent, Baluchistan was briefly declared an independent nation on August the 11th, 1947. And although the Pakistani founding leader, Jinnah, had supported an independent Baluchistan, he underwent a change of view and perspective, and the Pakistan army invaded and forced the accession of Baluchistan into Pakistan. Since then, and we've debated this over a number of years, there's been a saga of struggles for independence marked by persistent resistance and repeated insurgencies. And the trigger for the renewed phase was the murder, you may recall, Sir Christopher, of the Nawab Akbar Khan Bhutto, a prominent Baloch leader, in 2006. This event sparked widespread unrest and leading to a growing momentum for Baloch independence, the Baloch independence movement. The campaign for self-determination has been fueled, I have to say, by the suppression by the Pakistani state of Baloch culture and language. Baluchistan's rich cultural heritage is woven into the fabric of its society. It reflects the history and its traditions and way of life. The Baloch people, with their distinct cultural identity, have maintained their unique traditions and customs over centuries. However, the vitality of their culture faces significant challenges, and due particularly to the suppression of their language. The Baloch people speak Balochi and Bravi languages, both of which are integral to their cultural identity. And despite the importance of these languages in preserving Baloch culture, they faced marginalization and neglect by official institutions. In Pakistan-occupied Baluchistan, Balochi and Bravi languages are not recognized as official languages, despite being the mother tongues of the local population. And education in these languages is limited, and their use in the media and official communication is minimal. And it undermines the Baloch people's ability to express themselves and, yes, maintain their cultural identity. There are also concerns as well about the hard facts of what is described as dispossession. Baluchistan's vast natural resources, natural gas and minerals, have made it a region of strategic importance, yet its inhabitants face significant economic challenges, including extensive poverty. The exploitation of the province's resources has not translated itself into prosperity for the local population. And despite the abundance of these resources, Baluchistan remains one of the poorest areas in the region. And again, that feeds discontent and uncertainty of the future for many people. In addition, in recent years, the imposition of major development projects without consultation or consent of the Baloch people has led to a widespread discontent and feelings of, yes, dispossession. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the CPEC, a flagship project, has raised concerns about the potential displacement of local communities and also a lack of transparency about the distribution of the benefits of these projects. So,
Can I commend, first of all, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Hayes and Harrington for bringing this forward. It always brings issues which are important, and I congratulate them on it. To go a stage further to what the Honourable Gentleman said, we've all heard of the historic march of the Baluch women to demand an end to the practice of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial murders, military operations and state brutality against the Baluchs in Baluchistan by the Pakistan Army. And these shocking atrocities must be immediately stopped. Does the Right Honourable Member not agree that we need to exert every possible diplomatic tactic to highlight the need for respect for women to be a priority right and not dismissed as a Western ideal?
I'm really grateful for that intervention. I absolutely concur with the sentiments of the intervention as well. Let me move on to that issue about human rights now that's been raised. I think we have to recognise that the situation in Baluchistan is marked by severe human rights violations, and that does demand the attention of this Parliament and the international community. There's mounting evidence now of systematic abuses and disregard for human rights. A number of human rights organisations that all of us have worked with over the years, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have documented now and condemned the widespread abuses that are taking place in the region. They've highlighted also the impunity enjoyed by the security forces responsible for these violations, and they've called for accountability. I think one of the Honourable Gentleman's made reference to it. One of the most alarming aspects of the situation is the frequency of abductions and enforced disappearances. Activists, intellectuals, students, lawyers, journalists and other individuals have been subjected to what can only be described as fairly horrific practices, often carried out by the Pakistani security forces. These individuals are often taken without any due process, held incommunicado and subject, we now know, to torture. Tragically, many of the victims have been forcibly disappeared, are later found dead, their bodies bearing signs of torture. This brutal, what is described as the kill and dump policy, has left families shattered and communities traumatised. And it does and has created an atmosphere of fear and silence in many areas. The other aspect of human rights is freedom of expression and assembly, and they've also been severely curtailed. Journalists face violence, censorship and threats, inhibiting their ability to report on issues affecting the province. People are denied the space to peacefully assemble and express their grievances. The Honourable Gentleman made reference to the Long March. Recently, a historic and powerful Long March was led from the capital Quetta to Islamabad by Baloch women, as the Honourable Gentleman has said, and that was to demand an end to the practice of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial murders and the state brutality by the Pakistan Army. In the marchers faced violence by the state authorities and were abused and arrested after reaching Islamabad. During a 32-day-long sit-in to demand that those who had been forcibly abducted were produced in courts, the marchers, mainly women and children, faced threats, intimidation and harassment on a daily basis. They were forced to return to Quetta after this level of intimidation and harassment from state agencies. And now the families who participated in the march are receiving threats and cases are being registered against them. Dr. Maron Balak, who led the march, is receiving serious death threats, and her life, to be frank, is in danger at the moment. There's been a recent increase in enforced disappearances, and in fact, this is the tragedy. Enforced disappearances of Balak political activists and students and teachers has almost become the norm now, and dead bodies who are forcibly abducted are constantly being found as a result of these extrajudicial murders.
Will my honourable friend give way? I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I'd like to echo his admiration for the courage of the women leading the long march to Islamabad from across Baluchistan, raising awareness about human rights abuses in the region. In addition to this, does my honourable friend share my grave concerns with Pakistan's treatment of Afghan refugees who have fled to the country, with reports that Pakistani authorities have subjected them to arbitrary arrest, detention, harassment and ill treatment? And so will he join in calling on our government not just to end the cruel treatment of refugees who come to Britain, but to also urge Pakistani authorities to end their inhumane treatment of Afghan refugees as well?
There seems to be a pattern that's developed with regard to the Pakistan security and state forces of impunity. And it's reflected in what's happening in Baluchistan, but it's also reflected in what's happening with regard to the Afghan refugees in particular. Many of us have constituents whose families are still facing severe intimidation in Pakistan itself, although they've fled from Afghanistan, and now being forced back across the border and put their lives at risk. I think there's a real issue here. I know the government has taken these issues up, and we need to ensure that we maintain those representations on the Pakistan Authority. It doesn't help because of the political instability within Pakistan itself over the recent elections as well, but it's an extremely valid point to be made. The dead bodies, as I say, of those forcibly abducted, it's now been a regular occurrence now for them to be dumped, as we said, as part of this dump and kill policy. I wrote to the Foreign Secretary, Sir Christopher, to raise my concerns about the wave of recent human rights abuses, and I'm grateful for Lord Ahmed, the Minister of State, for his positive response expressing the government's concerns, and yes, the serious representations the government have made to the Pakistan authorities. His letter, I thought, was extremely helpful and deserves wider publicity. He's made it absolutely clear he's discussed the need to uphold human rights in meetings with the caretaker foreign minister in Pakistan, and he's raised the issue of the enforced disappearances directly as well. We hope the Pakistan authorities are listening, but to date, unfortunately, despite the strength of our representations, the pattern of behaviour goes on. The Baloch diaspora and human rights organisations and activists across the globe now in many countries have called for independent investigations into the human rights abuses and the holding to account of those found responsible. And despite the challenges and risks, Baloch activists have taken to various platforms to raise awareness about their cause. They've used social media, international conferences and dialogue with human rights organisations, and they've worked assiduously to shed light on the situation as it now is. And the goal is to garner international attention and support and solidarity to press for their demands. And that's really what this debate is about. And the demands are straightforward: an end to the military operations, the emphasising and the need for a peaceful resolution of disputes as they now are, human rights protection, an end to human rights abuses, particularly enforced disappearance and extrajudicial killings, the need for resourcing of rights, the resource rights for the Baloch people to gain the benefits from their natural resource of natural gas, minerals and their strategic location, cultural preservation, the need to protect culture, language and heritage, which are integral to the Baloch identity. And also, yes, of course, the demand for freedom has risen again, the movement that seeks complete independence of Baluchistan from all occupying powers, and they wish to aspire to participate in the governance and policy making and determination of their own destiny. So the vision for Baluchistan's future that many hold to is one of a community that's empowered, prosperous and resilient, but founded on the principles of justice, human rights, and yes, the realisation of the Baloch people's long-awaited aspirations for self-determination. However, they are the objectives. The issue now is the immediate issue is the deterioration situation in Baluchistan, and it demands immediate attention from our own government and other governments across the globe now. The plight, I believe, of the Baloch people cannot be overlooked any longer, and therefore we need concerted efforts to address their grievances. I'm pleased with the government's actions so far, and I'd like to raise a number of other issues with the Minister, if I may, very briefly, a number of questions. First of all, with regard to bilateral aid and development projects, can I ask how is the UK's foreign aid to Pakistan being utilised, especially in the promotion of human rights and democracy? And can we ensure that there are safeguards in place to ensure that aid does not indirectly support or enable human rights abuses? With regard to the safety and rights of protesters and march participants, given the recent marches and protests against the disappearances in Baluchistan, what further steps can the UK Government and Parliament take to ensure the safety and rights of the protesters? Could the Government exert further pressure on the Pakistani authorities to respect the rights to peacefully assemble and the right to expression, and to respond to the demands of these marches with dialogue rather than crackdowns? On international collaboration for human rights monitoring, can the UK Government work with international partners and organisations to monitor human rights in Baluchistan more effectively? Maybe the UK Government could take a role in coordinating international pressure to be applied to ensure accountability for human rights violations. And then support for civil society and human rights defenders. Could I ask what measures the UK Government can take to support civil society organisations and human rights defenders in Pakistan? And how can their safety and freedom of operation be ensured? And then with regard to trade policies, how do UK and Pakistan trade policies consider human rights issues? Should trade agreements include clauses that promote human rights and require regular assessments of a human rights situation, particularly in where we've seen perpetrators like Pakistan ignore many of the basic foundations of international law? And then with regard to the role of international human rights bodies, how can we support international human rights bodies such as the UN Human Rights Council to investigate and address human rights abuses in Baluchistan? And could the UK advocate for a special session or resolution focusing on Baluchistan? And then finally, with regard to the protection of refugees and asylum seekers, could we now look at how asylum policies are being applied with regard to those coming from Baluchistan who are in fear of their lives? And also, on that basis, can we look at the ways in which we can cooperate with others with regard to, on security matters, with regard to the protection of human rights, and particularly of those people fleeing here? So, Christopher, I hope that this debate will be the start of an ongoing dialogue to secure the human rights of the people of Baluchistan. I thank the government for the work it's undertaken so far. I think the concerns I've raised are shared by the government and across the House and all political parties. The issue for us now is how do we move forward to have effective influence on the Pakistani government to ensure that the Balochi people can have their freedoms protected.
The question is that this House has considered human rights in Baluchistan, Pakistan. Minister.
Thank you, Sir Christopher, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for Hazen Holling, for this important debate and his important focus on raising awareness of the challenges faced by the people of Baluchistan. As Lord Ahmad, as the honourable member said, who is the Minister for State for South Asia, is unable to take part in this debate, I'm happy to respond on behalf of the government. And noting the right honourable member's questions, there are some to which I may not be able to provide a detailed answer today, but I will make sure that Lord Ahmed does so for him. But just specifically on the question of aid, we do have a rolling programme, the Awaz 2 programme, which is bringing together influential community and faith leaders and minority representatives to work on resolving both local issues and indeed to change behaviours. This programme is working with government to try and improve protection and justice services for victims of gender-based violence. In particular, the focus on women and girls' rights and gender equality in Pakistan is at the centre of that particular programme that is ongoing, and so far it's reached over 24 million people. But if I may, as a Christopher, just to start with a few words on Pakistan. Of course, the UK and Pakistan enjoy a close and long-standing relationship, underpinned by strong links between our people. And less than 2 weeks ago, the people of Pakistan voted in long-awaited elections for their both national and provincial assemblies. And the following day, which was the 9th of February, the Foreign Secretary issued a statement in which he highlighted serious concerns about the fairness and lack of inclusivity of those elections. And he urged the authorities in Pakistan to uphold fundamental human rights, including free access to information and the rule of law. This includes, of course, the right to a fair trial and an independent and transparent judicial system. Members will be aware that Pakistan is one of the FCDO's human rights priority countries due to our concerns over the challenges facing many of its citizens. Disturbing practices, as the Right Honourable Member has highlighted, such as enforced disappearances, torture while in custody and extrajudicial killings are reported across Pakistan. And many of these credible reports of human rights abuses do come from Baluchistan, which is the subject of today's debate. Sir Christopher, Baluchistan is Pakistan's largest and most sparsely populated province. And whilst the province is rich in natural resources, it also has the highest levels of illiteracy, malnutrition and infant mortality in Pakistan. The security situation is particularly challenging, and the FCDO advises against all travel to the province except for its southern coast, where we advise against all but essential travel. There are significant levels of instability and violence, including from separatist militia groups who conduct terrorist acts, some in the name of Baloch independence, from the Pakistani state. So the heightened terrorist threat was demonstrated recently when dozens of people were killed in Quetta, Baluchistan's capital, in attacks the day before those elections that I mentioned. And on election day itself, more than 20 explosions and rocket attacks were reported outside polling stations in the province, killing 4 and injuring over a dozen people. Many members of Pakistan's armed forces and police have also lost their lives in Baluchistan, and my thoughts are with all of those who were affected by those acts of violence. And the reality is that fragile security situation has hampered the UK's diplomatic and development work in the region, and I'll try and address that in a little more detail. The Pakistani military maintains a strong presence in Baluchistan. The government claims that it's taking necessary action against those using violence, but local and international human rights organisations, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has set out, allege that Pakistani authorities are responsible for abuses, including extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. As colleagues have mentioned, the long march by an extraordinary group of Baloch women in December to Islamabad, where they participated in this sit-in protest seeking to draw attention to the situation in Baluchistan, demanding justice and calling for the UN to deploy fact-finding investigation into the region, I think was an extraordinary demonstration of the power of peaceful protest at its finest, an extraordinary group of women. And of course, this is a long-standing issue. The delegation on the UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances visited Pakistan back in 2012. And the report from that delegation of UN experts welcomed the government's will to tackle the issue, but did note that serious challenges remained. And the UN Working Group at the time received over 1,000 allegations of enforced disappearances from within Pakistan between 1980 and 2019, with more than 700 people still missing. Pakistan has made some efforts to deal with enforced disappearances. In 2010, Pakistan's Interior Ministry set up a committee to investigate the reports, and the following year its Supreme Court launched a commission of inquiry into those cases so that law enforcement agencies could listen to the concerns of the families that were involved. And these were, of course, welcome steps. And we recognise, though, that over a decade has passed since the introduction of these initiatives, and there are still considerable issues remaining unresolved. So, Sir Christopher, may I set out very clearly, the UK absolutely strongly condemns any instances of extrajudicial killings or enforced disappearances which have such a damaging and destructive impact on families, on communities, and on the rule of law. So we cannot allow these practices to continue unchecked, and we urge Pakistan to fully investigate allegations, to prosecute those responsible, and to provide justice to victims. Now, the UK regularly raises our concerns over human rights with the government of Pakistan, including in support of freedom of expression, rights of minorities and of women, and the importance of an independent and transparent judicial system. Our High Commissioner is in regular touch with the Caretaker Minister for Human Rights, and our political counsellor recently met senior officials in the Human Rights Ministry to discuss this issue of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings in Baluchistan. The British High Commission in Pakistan routinely engages with Baloch politicians based in Karachi and Islamabad to gain insights into the politics of the region and to try and help us assess the security situation. And they're hoping to visit Quetta when the security situation allows. Now, Lord Ahmad raised the issue of enforced disappearances with the then Minister for Human Rights last June 2023, and he's looking forward to meeting Pakistan's new minister in that role once the new government is fully formed. So we are continuing in the meantime to work with our international partners, civil society and human rights defenders to raise those human rights issues with the government of Pakistan. The security challenges in Baluchistan make supporting development programmes there more difficult than in other parts of Pakistan because of the safety situation. But of course, some of our most important international development programmes in Pakistan support positive outcomes in Baluchistan as elsewhere across the country. Our education initiatives in particular are helping to provide more robust data on education to improve the quality of schooling across Pakistan, including in Baluchistan. And in 2022, the UK government provided humanitarian assistance through the form of emergency shelter, hygiene items and nutritional support in the province during the devastating floods. So if I may, Sir Christopher, to conclude, the UK continues to be deeply concerned. Yes, of course.
I'm grateful for Minister, what she said so far. Can I just raise 2 points with her, really? One is this issue with regard to current safety of those who protested, in particular Dr. Maran Barlock, whose life, I believe, is under severe threat, and what representations that we can make with regard to the Pakistani authorities to ensure her safety. The second is with regard, just associated with that, can I just say it's too easy for the Pakistan authorities to accuse civil society organisations of being linked with terrorists or supporting terrorists, etc. Pakistan government doesn't seem to recognise civil society organisations being able to peacefully express their views, and therefore, unfortunately, at times reacts in the way it does by branding every organisation with the same tag. The second point is Lord Ahmad, I think, has done good work. I'd be very grateful for a number of us to be able to meet with Lord Ahmad to talk through some of these issues so that we can have the ongoing dialogue, particularly the monitoring of what's happening at the moment and the threat that there is to individuals and organisations. That's ongoing, particularly because of the instability within Pakistan. So,
thank you. I take absolutely the Right Honourable Gentleman's point about the particular question of Dr. Moran and her current safety, and I will pick that up with the team at the High Commission and make sure that he's updated. And I think he makes a really important point, and it is sadly not only with necessarily Pakistani authorities, we see that inability to understand and respect civil society voices and their peaceful protests, their willingness to share their concerns through peaceful means and allowing them to be constrained with those voices. And I think we are all agreed that these are the countries that sit under the areas of concern that we highlight are often ones that simply are not willing to understand or separate the two. And I have no doubt at all that I can commit Lord Ahmed to a meeting in due course with the Right Honourable General and a group of people in order to that they can together discuss, I think, what we all agree is a continuing deep concern about these human rights abuses that have been highlighted today in Baluchistan, in particular the extrajudicial killings and the enforced disappearances. So, and I know that Dr. Ahmed, were he here, would say the same. He is looking forward, as are the team in the High Commission, to working with the new government as they take up their posts across a range of these shared interests, and to continue to focus and engage on those human rights issues specifically. And I think, just to finish, if I may, Sir Christopher, I'd just like to echo the Foreign Secretary's recent statement where he set out his hope that the next government of Pakistan will understand that they must be accountable to all the people that they serve, and indeed work to represent the interests of all Pakistan's citizens and their communities with equity and with justice. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered human rights in Baluchistan, Pakistan. As many of the opinions say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding